Hi, everyone, and welcome to this first edition of StoryFutures Presents, the new contemporary storytelling series by StoryFutures. My name is Asta Amundsen, and I'll be hosting these talks. And I'm a theatre maker and now also a doctoral practice researcher with StoryFutures, looking at personalization of live interactive audience experiences. StoryFutures is led by Royal Holloway, University of London, and is part of the Arts and Humanities Research Council's Creative Industries Clusters programme. Representing the Gateway Cluster and Greater London, we are concerned with delivering game-changing R&D projects. Placing innovation and innovative storytelling at the heart of next generation immersive technologies, we exist to fuel innovation and growth in immersive storytelling by sharing cutting edge research with creative SMEs. We aim to innovate in story form, evolve business models, and develop data management processes, as well as enhance audience experiences. The StoryFutures Presents platform is more so specifically linked to the story form innovation part of this remit, and is a platform for showcasing novel and timely perspectives from makers and researchers across the expanded immersive field. So this will include immersive theatre and embodied live practices, interactive digital narrative, as well as all expressions of expanded realities, alongside platform agnostic design approaches, such as what we'll be hearing about today. Through the series, we will consider how the new sort of developments in immersive storytelling are shaped by current funding and production realities, while also reflecting on how the evolution of these kind of mediums, affordances, and story forms fit within the wider context of media arts and digital performance history. The first talk will be followed by a second on the 25th of June, so do watch out for that announcement. From the autumn on, this will become a monthly series on the last Thursday of each month, staying in this same late afternoon 4 to 5 p.m. slot. Today's speaker is Jason Crouch. Jason is a maker, researcher, and creative technologist, working across a wide range of creative, technical, and production roles across live performance. He has written and produced plays and created and collaborated on performances at hugely contrasting scales. So from the very intimate one-to-one through to large site-specific complex work. His projects have included several partnerships with theatres and digital performance labs, including Contact in Manchester and Culture Hub in New York City, building multi-site events that unite remote participants and performers and audience from different time zones onto the one stage. He completed his PhD Mediated Messages at Manchester Metropolitan in 2017. And this practice-based research investigated digitally mediated intimacy expressed as one-to-one performance and set against the widespread adoption of evolving communication technologies. He is a research associate at Future Everything, has spoken at Arts Electronica, and contributed to numerous technology in arts panels. He's curated and run numerous workshops on live streaming and remote performance, both in real life and online, and recently supported Gateshead International Festival of Theatre in making a very swift pivot to an online-only festival in the response to the early lockdown of the pandemic. So there will be a Q&A after the talk, with the talk running approximately 30 minutes. And for that post-talk portion of your experience, we will be joined by Adam Gantz, who's head of StoryFutures Academy Writers' Room, and by Dr. Aneta Manciewicz from Royal Holloway, University of London's Drama Department. They will both join us with video, and I encourage you all to join in the conversation as well. So do say hi and place your questions via the YouTube chat window as we go along, and I will pick out questions and put them to Jason, Adam, and Aneta after the talk. Please do like and follow this channel for updates on future talks. A recording of this talk will be uploaded to YouTube and be available via this page, as indeed will all future talks in this series. Our next talk on the 25th of June will be with Christian Scheren, researcher and co-founder of Be Another Lab. It's entitled Entanglements, Embodiment, Agency and Narrative Practice. So more information on that after the talk, and do stay tuned for the announcement once that happens. Don't forget to sign up to StoryFutures newsletters for exciting announcements and opportunities by visiting us at storyfutures.com. And please follow us on Twitter at StoryFutures. If you are tweeting about this talk or series specifically, please use the hashtag StoryPresents. For now, please do say hi via chat and give this video a thumbs up. It's now my great pleasure to hand you over to Jason Crouch asking, but where's the stage?
Hey, Asta. And hello, everyone. Oh.
Sorry, gone.
Brilliant. This is slightly odd. I'm more of a backstage person usually, and this is kind of a bit of both, bit of backstage and in front of the stage. So, hi. I'm Jason, and I've been working somewhere in between arts and technology for most of my life, which now I think about it sounds like a kind of a mission. It's not. It's me trying to come clean that I've been spending my time hanging around with experts in different fields, learning from many trades whilst not quite achieving a mastery of any one. But hopefully it'll give me some insight into how stories meet platforms. I like to begin with this quote from the artist Paul Dvorak, as it helps me to think about what kind of future I want and how I hope we get there. Today I'm going to set the scene for this series of talks about story futures by first taking a short detour to the past. I'm going to talk about some of the ways artists have twisted, bent and broken technology to make sense of the world and to connect to others in it. I'm also going to talk a little about my own practice and how that's influenced how I think about storytelling in online or digital spaces. I'm also going to talk about what it's like when a niche area of work you've carved out is suddenly the place everyone wants to be, or at least is the place everyone thinks they want to be. Because right now we can't go back into the theatres and art centres, and they're the places that for much of my life have defined the production and consumption of the work of theatre. In talking about these things, the plan is to touch upon insights into digital storytelling that I've been gifted or found along the way. I've been working in and around theatre at various scales and forms for a number of years, including large-scale outdoor shows, as a dramaturg, a technician, a designer and writer. I've also been tinkering with technology and performance for as long as it's been feasible and affordable to do so. I recently finished a PhD which focused on one-to-one performance enacted through technologies like video conferencing or text messaging. Some of the work I do is to research various combinations of arts and technology and to pass on that learning. Some is to build infrastructure. Some is to support people telling their stories from a conference lectern, from a theatre stage or through a digital platform. Sometimes I tell stories of my own, but I'm happiest creating spaces where stories tell themselves. I was also lucky enough to be working with Contact Theatre in Manchester at a time when it was making a concerted effort to turn towards the digital. Part of this was building a relationship with a New York-based technology lab, Culture Hub, an offshoot of experimental theatre space La Mama. In practice, this gave me the opportunity to work with pioneers in network performance. We'd used new media tools and video conferencing gear to make hybrid stages, with performers and audiences in different cities sharing the same experience. And for a long time, I was also given the support and space to prototype and develop new streaming and video techniques, working with production teams and theatre artists. The word collaboration will come up time and time again in this talk. I think one of the reasons for this is that many of the areas of performance design or visual art I found myself involved in, they don't seem to intersect, even when the work is with similar tools towards similar ends. I hope that during this time we learn how flexible the boundaries between disciplines can be. I'm happiest working collaboratively with other people to tell stories or build narratives. These might be ideas cut from whole cloth, or tales assembled from the life experiences of performers or participants. It might be the story I think some research wants to tell, or it might be creating or occupying a space just to discover what stories might live there. But I'm wary of the structures we use to create and tell stories, mainly because I'm wary they reflect societal structures that are imposed upon people in the wider world. Stories shape the way we exist. With a deft blend of the logical step-by-step and the rush of emotion, they hold authenticity and truth within them. But these truths are contingent. They require belief and will use handy shortcuts to create characters that fit, and in so doing, they can run down familiar rails. Using predetermined categories of character, avatar, landscape, or culture can fragment a story as much as it reaches for something universal. As I've said, my background is in theatre, and theatre is almost always a collaborative effort. Theatre is made by artists who might be performers, technicians, designers, directors, dramaturgs, or stage managers, even when the stage is an undercroft, a car park, a tower block, or now, a screen. The process of theatre making also includes the producers, the programmers, the venues, and the marketing teams. It will, of course, include the audience, although it sometimes feels that audience is a somewhat contested term, being somehow simultaneously a homogeneous block of spectators and also a cluster of individuals who require perfectly tailored experiences. The more I learn about theatre making, the more it becomes clear that, whilst individuals with particular skill sets are central to the task, a complex and continuous collaboration between all of the people involved in creating, distributing, and engaging with the work makes for better work. The phrase StoryFutures invokes to me a kind of grand designs flair. It gestures to possibility and to opportunity. There is a sci-fi sense of unimagined vistas and new frontiers. Yet I think at this moment in time, it is very difficult to imagine these things without also thinking about the technologies that make them possible. Technologies that, far from being ethically neutral, exist within the frameworks and structures that perpetuate the status quo. Raymond Williams suggested that technology does not come into society as a radical change maker or even as a harbinger of change. Rather, it is the capitalization of technology that brings it into common usage, a colonization of the new by an already dominant ideology. David Buckingham leans into this thought, describing technology as both societally shaped and societally shaping. Its role and impact is partly determined by the uses to which it is put, but also contains inherent constraints and possibilities which limit the ways it can be used, and are which in turn largely shaped by the social interests of those who control its production, circulation, and distribution. New platforms for stories aren't neutral. Audre Lorde reminds us, there are no new ideas, there are only new ways of making them felt. We must not only recognise the way in which our stories come to life by being shared and spoken, but we must also recognise the context in which new stories are told. Right now, we're told the digital tools we use to engage with each other require more attention, more effort. At this moment, our lives are lived alongside the background hum of a global pandemic. Our socialization is suspended or replaced by technologies that might feel a little bit like work. Maybe like the WhatsApp buzz before a meetup with friends, but without the eventual payoff of actually getting together. This is not to say that we can't build radical stories within existing structures. Indeed, artists are eminently capable of bending structures to their will and to discovering the edge cases and grey areas that even the developers of virtual spaces have no knowledge of or interest in. Stories shape the world. Yet the stories we tell using online and digital tools are as much an interrogation of the places we tell them in as they are of the characters in the stories themselves. As storytellers in a connected world, it is our duty to also reveal how the technology influences the telling, how the infrastructure drives the story and determines who takes part. To do this, we have to understand how the spaces we tell those stories in often reinforce the existing shape of our world. This is especially clear now as we take a hard look at the stories of our past and who define them. So it is up to us to make sure there is space for all stories and to make sure that the spaces we occupy to tell these stories don't privilege one storyteller or one story over another. This is only ever achieved by working collaboratively with creative teams that reflect the world we live in and the worlds we want to live in. And it should not need to be said, but it seems it always does need to be said. The greater number of different voices and perspectives we include in our storytelling teams, the better our stories will be, the better worlds we will create, and the richer tapestry of experience we will generate. I'm often surprised at how the category of digital seems to pop up as though it is something quite new and different. The digital strategies of governments and brands, the art centre, theatre or gallery offering up a new season of digital works, as though digital or online activities haven't already intertwined so successfully with our lives that it would take some huge effort to de-digitalise. Designer and urbanist Dan Hill says, technology is culture. It is not something separate. It is no longer IT. We cannot choose to have it or not. It just is, like air. Yet sometimes it feels like if we don't interrogate enough the ways digital services shape the way the world operates. Of course, there's the brilliant work being done on algorithmic bias by folks such as Safia Noble, Cathy O'Neill, and the Algorithmic Justice League, to name but a few. Journalists and researchers have investigated and illuminated how social media interactions have influenced voting or deliberately sought to shift the emotion of the users. Yet there is a power in the way that storytelling can expose the very shape of the space in which it operates. Of course, artists have always worked with new technologies, the pen, the theatrical light, sound system, synthesizers and lasers, but the framing of an experience as art means that it also gives us license to question things that might otherwise be accepted as given. I'm just over 50. Yet just before I said my first word, media artists were already subverting performance and technology to create new hybrids. When I was a teenager, artists were already experimenting with video systems to create stages that spanned continents. The last 20 years or so have seen huge leaps in the development of digital communication technologies and have seen these technologies become widely available. They have become second nature, part of our everyday. Alan Caprow's Hello was made as an interactive video happening as part of the TV show The Medium is the Medium, broadcast on Boston's WGBH TV station in 1969. It used the TV station's closed circuit outside broadcast system to connect 4 remote locations using 5 cameras and 27 monitors. Groups of participants were sent out with instructions to perform actions based on what they saw through the monitors, maybe saying, "Hello, I see you," when they saw an image of themselves or others they recognized. Caprow functioned as director, switching the images the monitors displayed from one camera to another. In doing so, he conducted a technologically mediated wide area game of tag. Caprow was interested in the ideas of communication media as non-communications and oneself in connection with someone else. Hello works as a critique of the disruptive nature of mediated interaction. Using the closed circuit of the TV infrastructure, it short circuits the TV network, highlighting the potential for human-to-human connectivity rather than the broadcast mode it normally operates as. Asking the question, who gets to be seen? In the time of Zoom, when hookups, family quizzes, birthday parties, weddings, and even theatre is being constructed in real time over the screen, it would be crazy not to mention one of the most celebrated examples of pre-internet telematic performance, the hole in space. This artwork was created by artists Kit Galloway and Sherry Rabinowitz in 1980. Using borrowed satellite broadcast technology, they opened up a virtual tunnel between the Broadway department store in Los Angeles and the Lincoln Center in New York City. With cameras and screens in both locations, live feed from one location was back projected in black and white and at life size onto the other. Audio was also transmitted, allowing passers-by an unprecedented way to communicate between each other thousands of miles apart. It was only up for 3 days, yet new relationships were struck up. Folks returned every day to see and chat with each other. Relatives and friends in the two cities made arrangements to meet up through the artwork. It became influential both in the arts and technology worlds, with Steve Harrison, then part of the Media Space project at Xerox PARC, citing the artwork as changing the way he thought about video-mediated communication, emphasizing the extent to which it fundamentally influenced his own work and that of others. So, streaming audio and video between different places as part of an artwork is by no means new, but it is very much more affordable. We're drawn to platforms or systems that are designed for theatre or gaming. Of course we are, with their ready-made tool sets and protocols. There is also some fascination in creating an artwork in places where such things are rarely enacted. Collider's You With Me is a one-to-one audience experience which takes place entirely within the bounds of a 45-minute telephone call. The performer and participant never see each other and hear each other's voices only through the phone. The director, Seth Honor, imagines the perfect setup for the piece as just a place to be in the city centre, a telephone number to call, and a time to call that number. For the participant, the call shifts between different styles of conversation, at times as playful as a game, at others contemplative and reflective, almost therapeutic. For them, the work feels relaxed and open, which shows how deftly hidden the tightly scripted structure is. There is orchestration too, a whole team of observers and facilitators keeping the performer grounded with information about the movements and actions of the participant. This feeds into their improvisation, bringing a kind of "how did they do that" magic to the game. The structure of the call begins with some simple instructions. Turn left here, go north. This swiftly becomes a game of hide and seek. Try and lose me, says the performer. This starts a breathless chase through a crowded city. This game of chase can't really be won or lost. In most cases, the participant always remains under surveillance, but some are too darn good at hiding and running and manage to escape. But this is folded into the work as well. Escape is a rush, whilst being tracked by an unseen voice is sorcery. Participants have said in this moment they feel like a suspect operating out of normal parameters, becoming aware of the busy city, the busy citizens, as an audience for their own transgressive behaviour. Once the game is over, the participant is invited to share a drink with their performer, not physically in the same space, but each wherever they are. It is in this section that the conversation tends to turn to the introspective and intimate. Describing this part of the show, Honor calls up an analogy of the blue whale, for the most part existing on the surface of the ocean, basking, breathing, drifting. Then, taking the deepest of breaths, it dives right down into the depths. The participant almost always readily makes this deep dive. Maybe this is because of the adrenaline rush or endorphins released after running through the city. But time after time, they will go to what Honor describes as the conversation in their lives that they are not quite having. Led by their performer, the participant ends up adrift in time and space, being gifted a peculiar and particular moment to make conversation with a stranger, one they will almost certainly never meet out in the real world. These conversations are characteristically intimate, which brings into play ethical issues for the company, both around privacy and confidentiality for the participant, but also highlighting the vulnerabilities of the performer. Measures are taken to ensure the safety of both, and decompression is built into the structure of the show itself. Audiences are delighted with the runaround game and insanely curious as to how particular actions or interactions were made to happen without any obvious agent. Yet the strongest emotional feedback comes from the conversation they had during this moment of stillness. The infrastructure once again provides a place for fragmentary stories to flourish, for deep emotion to come into play. This is a form of mediated intimacy, an exposure of self and the sharing of private information made possible by the limits and the parameters of the performance and the technology. My background is largely in theatre. By navigating that world, it becomes clear that the theatre holds universes inside it. The word theatre is derived from the ancient Greek viewing place, so theatre is defined not by architecture but by the action and intent of the people who assemble there. And whilst the word theatre still seems to mean Shakespeare, the school play or Cats, I've been lucky enough to see many works that expand and explode that simple definition. This might be the intimacy of a one-to-one experience, the immersive obsession of a durational performance, or the spectacle of site-specific outdoor shows punctuated by fireworks and chance encounters. What is key is an in-the-moment liveness, a sense of palpable presence between these people at this time, in this place. A similar or related driver is to do with creating an environment in which stories or interactions seem naturally to come into being, creating a kind of storytelling framework or scaffolding. This might be down the rabbit hole of the immersive worlds of companies like Punch Drunk or Dream Think Speak, or in the riotous training grounds of Louise Murray and Nigel Barrett's Party Skills for the End of the World. That last show has recently been remade, and quite successfully remade, inside the conference software Zoom. There is a rich history of relational artworks in the gallery, although you could almost say that all gallery work exists only in the momentary relationship between spectator and artwork. But what I'm talking about here are the artworks that come into being in the moment they are engaged with, artworks that corral a temporary community around a significant artifact or instruction, things that can't be said to exist at all without human action, without the liveness of engagement. In theatre, performance, and live art, there are numerous examples of works that engage for interaction of one type or another. These might be instruction-based works that directly ask the audience questions, creating fragments of stories from the interplay between performers and audiences, or playable theatre that goes with the flow of audience choices. These are examples of the creation of a kind of theatrical infrastructure within the temporary community of performers and audiences, a space where stories are nurtured and encouraged to grow. For Borderline Vultures, an immersive environment constructed in 30 rooms inside an abandoned factory, the audience could largely make up their own walls. Yet this was never formally disclosed. As the audience entered, each individual was asked to put on a numbered lab coat and then ushered into a testing room. Yet no lab technician ever followed them. Instead, they were shortly joined by another audience member. A friend remembers swapping his lab coat with theirs, thinking to somehow mess up the show, but it soon became apparent that no one was coming to check up on them. But he felt no disappointment. Rather, there was a liberation in the realization that do what they wilt was the order of the day. Because of this, when making work at the intersection between technology and theatre, I find myself preoccupied with this same sense of liveness, these same ideas of community. What is it that makes this moment special? What is it right now that has never happened before in this place with these people? My research really began in the intersection of two broad ideas. The first I heard in an interview with theatre maker Chris Thorpe. He describes theatre as a laboratory in which we can discover more about who we are, a kind of theatre as lab. The second was a stat from a Pew Research study which claimed that more than 50% of our interactions with each other are now conducted through digital means, email, texting, video. So this leads me to the notion that by taking an art or theatre-driven process into the spaces of social media, text messaging, video calls, we might learn more about who we are and how we are in those spaces. We can apply the theatre as lab approach to the worlds we spend half of our time in. John McGrath, during his tenure as Artistic Director of the National Theatre Wales, said that a key question a national theatre can ask of itself and its audience is, what is it to be in this place, and what do we want this place to be? By framing interactions as art, there seems to be a shift in the ways we let ourselves engage with them. It's reality, but slightly not. There is a freedom to be had in understanding that this is just play or make-believe, but it does force us to question things. If we can do what we like, what are the things that influence our choices? What are the things we'll do? These kinds of interactions allow us to question not only the scenario we find ourselves in, but also who we are when we're there, giving us an opportunity to try out different versions of ourselves. It can also take us away from rigorous demands of what success and failure look and feel like out in the real world. Choosing to do things in this way or that might no longer carry the weight of having to do it correctly, nor the anxiety of getting it wrong. My research practice was in creating one-to-one mediated encounters. In making that work, I very quickly discovered that unlike much of the theatre I'd made or helped make before, constructing mediated encounters involved many more and different variables. There is precious little control of the stage. This might be to do with the different devices people use to engage with the work, or when and where they are when they choose to dip into it. It might be discovering when bandwidth mattered and when it didn't, what time zone audiences and performers might be in, when jitter and lag was part of a thing and when it just got in the way. It involves a ceding of control over how people choose to take part, becoming more aware of their agency, where they choose to place their attention and what drags them away. The only process that made sense in developing this kind of online or digital work was to constantly playtest, figuring out what works and what doesn't through the feedback of testers, performers, and sometimes strangers we met along the way. During my research, I made two final pieces of work. One was a video encounter between two strangers, one in Manchester and the other in New York, each one both performer and participant in their own experience. The technology used was professional and expensive video conferencing hardware, which made it easier to build a space in which the projections of the other side of the world became more of a portal than a postage stamp. The participants described the experience not as transporting themselves somewhere else, but instead that far location was brought to them, creating a distinctly private and temporary place just for their meeting, just for them. When one or other left the screen, they noticed an immediate sense of absence, even more so than should someone leave the room by a door, a vanishing trick. It has been a characteristic of a lot of the work that I've experienced in this technological space. It's vital to find ways to connect with performers who've just left the stage, or to allow audiences to decompress at the end of an emotional piece of work. Always, but particularly in lockdown, once the leave meeting button has been pressed, we are once again alone. My other research piece was built around text messaging. Prompted by a message on a poster or on a business card found in unfamiliar surroundings, driven by curiosity or desire, strangers began to text conversations with me, some lasting for days, others for months at a time. Later, talking about their experience, what stands out most for them was the potential for the unscripted and the unexpected. In particular, their ability to choose what aspects of themselves they might share, and the enjoyment to be found in the fragments the other party would share with them. Although rarely did they choose to share details of gender, race, or age, or even their name. Also of interest was the way that the conversation seemed to bend and reshape time, that the action of replay always seemed to be in the moment, the action of reply always seemed to be in the moment, despite texts often being read long after they were sent. Artist and theatre maker Tim Etchells, talking about his work, mentions the woodworking structure that school taught him the value of the right tool for the job. He turns this on its head by saying instead that the most interesting results from the work are reached by using the wrong tool for the job. Artists and arts practice allows us as makers and participants to explore the worlds and the tools we use to engage with it, to discover more about the unknown unknowns that permeate the release of new technologies. Using the wrong tool for the job helps us investigate how new tech enables and molds particular activity and the way it can be reclaimed for our own purposes. I've talked a lot about using my arts practice as a way to interrogate our digital surroundings, but what has taken up most of my time during the pandemic is helping artists reconfigure their work for a remote audience. Key to this process has been, and you can probably guess this right now, the collaboration of all parties involved. I'm not the guy to tell you this is how you stream your show, nor to pretend I know all the ways that might work or might go wrong. Instead, we'll talk about what the show is and means to you, what beats are important, what elements will survive or thrive in this shift to an online version, what sections will have to go or find another way to be told. Following the conceptual and dramaturgical chatter, there might be a period of playtesting. At first, all bets are off. Tests will cross platforms, use video or audio or neither. Tests in Twine, Twilio, YouTube or Zoom. This generally inclines the work to a particular platform or format. Material is worked, refined, tested to destruction, rebuilt, fed back on and tested again. Equipment is borrowed and exchanged, the wrong cables bought and new ones substituted. As part of this pattern, new parameters become available. What once was a 90-minute small-scale theatre show becomes an episodic game. An audience is invited to stage, but instead of getting up from their seats, their images are individually brought to screen in Zoom. In a 15-hour durational conversation, the performers share a screen rather than the table they would once have sat around. A dancer deftly manipulates text as he shares the icons on his desktop and the music from his archive, creating meaning live and in the moment. This year I worked as part of the team delivering the Gateshead International Festival of Theatre online. The artistic director, Kate Craddock, had already programmed the festival as she has done for the past 15 years. It was all set to be staged in various local venues, artists were signed up and contracts had been drawn. Then came lockdown. In a dialogue with the artists and team, Kate determined that a new incarnation of the festival could take place in online spaces, featuring recordings, adaptations and new work from the commissioned artists. The festival became a hugely successful experiment, the execution of which involved the artists, festival team, participants and audiences. How the work would be presented was always developed in conversation with artists. Some would simply pick up a platform and run with it. Others would carefully navigate the possibilities, working with a team to figure out a suitable workflow. There was always learning. For experts and neophytes, every new interaction seemed to create a new insight into the shape of the digital spaces and how we could play there. In the same way that theatre makers will work with the shape, sound and energy of a new venue, so too online spaces demand that kind of investigation. For GIFT, it was decided early on that rather than embrace the potential to stream to everyone in the world, whilst everyone in the world is also checking out Netflix, playing Red Dead online or reading a book, rather than stream to an unlimited audience, we would play to small houses, limiting capacity in much the same way as the real world festival would. This created an oddly familiar festival vibe of people queuing up for return tickets and cursing for sold out shows. It was also surprising how much of the pre-show experience, both backstage and in the waiting rooms, felt so similar to the experience in an actual theatre. For us backstage, there was a curious admixture of anxiety and boredom that sits in your stomach before the doors open. For those in the waiting room, there was the anticipation of the shows about to start. And often, once the doors had opened, those same waving of hellos and nods of recognition between the audience, but this time in the chat or on the screen. Using new platforms threw up a number of barriers to access, such as video conferencing tools which don't allow the user to place the BSL interpreter where they'd like them to be, platforms that made it difficult to allow BSL questions in the Q&A, new challenges in captioning and audio description. Yet these challenges have started our brains whirring, and we're already figuring out what research needs to be done to work on them. If we can't solve access problems when we're only able to engage with each other online, when can we? Many of these platforms are built for a specific purpose or suite of purposes. They may be configured for boardroom style turn taking, or like this one, for a webinar lecture. But theatre is neither of those things. Part of what theatre is the sharing of space between audience and performer. In searching for how to make some kind of simulation of that process, we might open up the chat or encourage conversations on social media. There might be moments when audiences are asked to turn off and on their video or hold up signs or change their name. Working both within and without the tools available allowed us to somehow generate the feeling of festival. So, in conclusion, work in collaboration with the widest and most inclusive teams to make the best work you can. Turn your focus on how platforms shape stories and work to make sure that no voices are lost. Figure out what structures from different art forms might work on your platform and with your art form. Learn from each other so we can all stand on each other's shoulders. As Lemsese, the poet, has said, reach for the top of the tree and you may get to the first branch, but reach for the stars and you'll get to the top of the tree. Thank you.
Hello, I think we're all
Hello.
back. Hi, Jason, thank you so much. We can simulate the whole audience here.
I'm clapping the audience now.
You were talking about the importance of extending these spaces either side of performances, and I guess we have a slight opportunity of that here. Thank you so much. That was very interesting and rich. And now I want to have QLab as well, so that I can make my video chats more interesting and rich like yours. So Adam or Aneta, would one of you like to start with questions?
Yeah, I'm happy to start, and I agree. It was amazingly beautiful and brilliant, and many of us have listened very intently. Thank you so much, Jason, and thank you so much for reminding us the genealogy of media and how things have been appearing for a number of decades, actually. I was really struck by a number of things in your talk, but the first thing that I want to ask you about, because this is about space, and you talked about how one of the definitions of theater is about space. I'm interested in what kinds of insights or ideas you have about creating a sense of shared space in a mediated environment. What are the key elements? I think I was really struck by, for instance, things about emotion, trust, intimacy. What do you think are the key requirements for creating a sense of liveness when we're not in the same space?
I think a lot of it comes down to sort of boundaries of trust. So I think that it's a lot to do with the sort of the setup, the way that you're introduced to the sort of way the conversation or interaction is going to occur. I always think that like a lot of video games have like a tutorial mode that you play at the beginning as you're sort of getting into the game, and it'll sort of teach you how to navigate the game world. And I feel that's very similar in sort of creating mediated theatre, is that you kind of, people have a belief that they want to be together. They have a trust in that the theatre achieves this kind of end. So they're kind of with you from the start, and you need to sort of help them sort of discover those possibilities within the worlds that you're creating.
Great. Yes, I wanted to pick up on this thing that you'd said about quoting Tim Etchell's about using the wrong tools for the job, and wondering kind of what new wrong tools might we start to use, or how kind of do you see things developing? There seems to be an extraordinary moment in the last months where this technology has gone from something strange to something really familiar, where people have kind of been suddenly using it often daily for all kinds of purposes, from kind of speaking to their family, staying in touch with their partner, working or whatever. And I was wondering how you think things might go forward in the relationship between the remote and the intimate, and the kind of where do you think we might go from here?
I'm always wary about saying where we might go. I think the most interesting thing for me about all these technologies suddenly being used by everybody is that does exactly what kind of using the wrong tool for the job or using artist practice to interrogate things is doing. People who perhaps wouldn't have used this for any more than a sort of conversation with their boss are now using it to have birthday parties or getting married in. All those activities sort of test the platform. They reveal all the things that it's just not very good at, but they also just make you discover other things. Like, you know, I remember when people just started using Zoom as the lockdown occurred, and suddenly everyone was being told, you know that the people who run the Zoom can read all of the chat, right? Because people were sneakily sending private messages to each other thinking no one's going to see this. It's great, isn't it? So they already discovered ways to pass notes in class. But, you know, then it was like, oh, actually, that's not hidden. Teacher can see that. So I think it's that in those things that we then find stuff we can value. I'm also, in my thesis, I write a lot about sort of, Theatrical talks about a sort of good enough, an idea of a simulation being sort of good enough. It doesn't have to be perfect. And that's, I think, to do with how much we trust it and how much we believe in it. And so, you know, this isn't the same as being with our friends, but it's good enough to make some kind of connection. And so there's something there about using the tools, but also discovering the limits to them.
Absolutely. I wondered if I could put you a question from our online audience. So Mary
Hi, online audience.
Yeah. Hi, thanks, guys. So Mary Matheson asks if you can talk about how you projected the characters in your Manchester, New York sort of telepresent experiences. Was it in 2D, or did you project the characters or also objects? Is what she wants to know.
Technical question. At that time, Contact and Culture Hub were doing a lot of work to try and create work that was simultaneously in a stage in New York and a stage in Manchester, with performers from both sides of the Atlantic performing in the same stage. And we did a lot of dance work, some theatre practice. I think for us in the Contact Theatre's main auditorium, the main process we used was to use projection gauze. So a gauze is like a sort of see-through material. It's like 50% see-through and non-reflective, which means you have to have a really good projector, otherwise you can't really see what's on it. What that does, it allows you to use various theatrical tools. So you can have someone projected onto the screen, and yet you can have performers behind the screen who are currently not lit, who are invisible to the audience. And as soon as you put the side lights on, suddenly they come from nowhere. And in that way, you can start to combine different people on stage. So no, we weren't using this kind of Tupac Shakur hologram technology. We were really doing it on the DIY and on the cheap.
It's interesting. How did they, so were, in terms of the gauzes, just for me to understand, in terms of the gauzes, were you interlayering dancers from each of the localities then in that?
The New York dancers came to Manchester on the screen, and the Manchester dancers were dancers in the space.
Right.
So it was always a hybrid space. It was always had the sort of physical connection between the people actually there and people brought through by telepresence technologies. And it was quite astonishing. The reason, one of the things that prompted my research in that area was because after we did one of these experiments, the dancers in the UK sat down and were talking about it, and as far as they were concerned, they just said that was just like being in the studio.
Right.
And for me, for someone whose practice is so embodied, so about the sort of tactile nature of the space and the interaction with people, to feel that they were somehow with another dancer, even though that dancer was thousands of miles away, was just astonishing.
So I'm assuming in that you had managed to avoid lag, because I could imagine that as being quite deadly.
No,
or did they just adapt to it?
Lag's tricky, man.
Yeah.
Lag is caused by a number of things. It's caused by like speed of light delay, obviously, because obviously the network signal has to get from here to there. But it's also caused by encoding. So these pictures that we see on our screen now are being taken by my camera here, and then Zoom is squishing them to allow them to fit into the bandwidth I have at home.
Yeah.
And that process takes time. It's being done in real time. And so, like, I think with the hardware equipment we used, the smallest lag we'd have from here to New York was about 200 milliseconds.
Right.
There are other technologies available, as always. There's some people in Trieste have developed a system for professional musicians to collaborate with each other, which is called Lola. That has a latency or lag of around 20 milliseconds. Provided it doesn't go further than around, I think, 2,000 kilometers. But the way it does it is it doesn't do any compression at all, which means you have to have an industrial scale network. It uses maybe a gigabit per second, which is, I don't know, 50 or 100 times more than I have here at home.
It's interesting.
Sorry, Adam.
Sorry, I was just thinking it's interesting that actually the moment of intimacies that you were describing are things that I can also feel when I watch a film or when I listen to a piece of recorded music, where kind of somehow I'm able to, you know, if it speaks to me directly, I'm able to kind of not only deal with the gap in space, but also the gap in time, that when I hear kind of Miles Davis or whoever else it might be, it feels absolutely in the moment, even though that moment was created, you know, 50 years ago or more. So perhaps it's really interesting what you said about, you know, the kind of text messages or the telephone call. Actually, it's how you evoke that kind of relationship. It's always someone to something, having the audience having a conversation with themselves, and how kind of the story machine or the space that you create allows that conversation to happen.
Do you think there's any particular things that undermine that sense of liveness? Because I think that's kind of a crucial thing to be aware of in this moment. Because yes, it's amazing how we still kind of respond like this is a unique moment in time, even with lags and so on. But what sort are there certain tells that sort of ruin that and bring us back to feeling alone with recorded media?
Do you mean like in like theatre making or performance making online, or do you also include listening to a recording of music? Because I think there's different things there, although some will be the same, I guess.
Yeah, no, I that was kind of more of a general question, really, because I'm quite aware of, because we're, you know, so much of what I do is specifically to do with things that are happening, like you, live in a particular place, which we're now trying to, you know, formulate in various ways through digital media, and you know, it's in a normal world that's kind of in contrast to pre-recorded things that we enjoy in our own time, as a, you know, with no assumptions of interaction and sort of no assumptions of liveness. And I'm just wondering, in these kind of experiences that are in some ways maybe hybrid, are there any particular things that are kind of deadening to the audience sense of liveness that you can think
of? I think I mean, bits where the technology glitches out, obviously is a moment when suddenly it's like no one's there. I used to always, this is terrible really, but I used to always just sit like this in a video call just to see if someone, oh, we've lost him, is he gone, what's happened? So I kind of tend to try and encourage artists to work with that in mind. So for example, if they have like a stream of text, like I've just delivered, that is complex and requires attention, they might need to use more bits of repetition because they might drop out. They might maybe work with the glitch, you know, work with the possibility of failure, you know, because you're on a tightrope and then things do pull you out. You know, seeing the wrong screen at the wrong time. Or when we started this, me having my face on the screen when I shouldn't have. That kind of, they're also really interesting junctures though, because people have, you know, people watching don't know what's supposed to be happening. Yeah. Generally. So it's kind of like, is this part of it?
But Jason, I'm also curious, because you were talking quite a bit about your experience with transferring the festival from live experience online. Do you think that, and I don't want to stress you with questions about the future, but do you think that there are things that you did for this project that will carry on even, you know, once we're out of pandemic?
I hope so. I mean, one of the things that we've talked a lot about, I'm still in contact with the team. They're a great team, amazing people. Is to think about what things we should keep, and what part of the thinking is like we've talked about technologies like Zoom or other telepresence solutions as saving airline tickets, or enabling people who in this country may find it difficult to get a visa to be able to perform in some way, to enable panel group discussions with artists, academics, and individuals who might be, you know, in far-flung countries. So there are things that we think, well, we shouldn't let these go. And there's also a whole bunch of stuff to do with access. You know, I mean, one of the things that I talk about a lot in when I talk to people about live streaming is that if your theatre has already started to invest in having captioning or something like this, getting the captioning to appear in the theatre and on the live stream is relatively trivial. So if you started to put those infrastructures in place, it means that you can then make your online work as accessible as your in-house work. And similarly, the other way around, if you start to work more extensively with access needs within the sort of framework of online presence, you should be able to transfer them back in. I think this is, it made it very apparent because we always had a BSL interpreter as part of the project. But we weren't thinking of doing captioning for GIFT. But then it became something that was really super useful. And then there's all sorts of different things that we had to sort of try and get through to get there. And you also felt a little bit like we should have thought of this before. I mean, we didn't know the pandemic was coming, but you know, you get to there, don't you? So yeah, it throws up a lot of things that I think going forward. I think that in general, the pandemic has thrown up a lot of things that have shown how precarious the structures that hold theatre together are. So, you know, I would hope we learn from all sorts of different things and take it forward.
So there's a couple of more questions from the online floor, as it were.
The floor.
Yeah. So TD Mitchell, like Mary Matheson, is interested in the specific broadcast platforms, capture and streaming technology realistically required for larger scale rather than one-to-one real-time performative work. So I guess I'm not sure if I'm getting your question quite right, but something along the lines of, have you any favorites or any particular thoughts around that?
I say to everyone that I talk about this work with is you just need to test and experiment with everything, because virtually every tool you find, even if you roll your own, is supposed to do something else. Like this isn't supposed to make theatre in. It's got loads of things about it that just are completely wrong for making performance work in.
Yeah,
the way it follows from the microphone around, the way it quenches sound. There's a million things wrong with this for performance, yet we make performance in it. You know, there's when we were doing the sort of the work between Manchester and New York, we were using some, at the time, very expensive bits of hardware, but they were video conferencing systems. They were designed for a boardroom. They're designed for, you know, a senior politician to talk to a businessman in a different country. They weren't designed to put dancers together on a stage. So we found ourselves finding new little bits of stuff that meant we could make the work, but that was not in the interest of the manufacturers of the technology. This is such a niche area for them. So the only way to discover how things work is to try them out. I mean, the number of different bits of software and hardware that, you know, we've used to do stuff. I could do another hour just by naming them.
So and finally, Dave Webb, with all our life work entertainment experiences mediated over similar channels, is there any appetite for technology-free experiences that allow remote connection, i.e. snail mail?
Is that for all of us? Or I mean, one of the slides I show in the thing was let's see if I can find it again. I don't know if I can show this quickly. See if my QLab thing breaks everything. Does it work? There we go. Mm-hmm. That was a project done by two friends of GIFT, who Gillian and Adam, who they would receive messages. And then Adam has like a real fascination with old typewriters, and he would type the messages up. So the messages were sent digitally to their website as part of GIFT. And then they would type them up, put them in envelopes and send them. There's always a possibility of that kind of interaction. And I've always loved that. I mean, it also goes towards a way of how the life of a show works. Tassel Stevens from Coney often describes a show as beginning when you first hear about it and ending when you forget about it. And a lot of the work they do will have sort of stuff that happens before the actual event and stuff that happens after the event. And that might involve exchange of things by mail or by text message or I appreciate text message is not necessarily a non-digital format, but by sharing of objects and things like this.
Yeah.
Of course it is. This is the best bit of it.
So there's a question from Miguel Rubello. Did you ever need to create a new platform for a specific show, or just mainly relied on existing platforms like Zoom or Skype and so on?
Yes and no. I mean, sometimes it's down to like easiness. Like once you discover the limits and the ways you can make Zoom bend to your will, as it were, then Zoom is really, really good at doing like relatively good video. Not so good at sharing sound, but there we found various workarounds for that. So, and it's easy to use. So if you've got a bunch of participants who aren't technically savvy or aren't interested in technology, then they can come into this and they can fairly easily navigate their way around. Culture Hub have also got their own platform that they've built from scratch, which they use for, was originally designed to be used as a theatre system to then basically map video assets onto different projection surfaces and things like that. But it also works over the internet. I think there's some talk of that becoming an open source project at some point in the future, if not already. But yes, there are definitely ways to do that. I mean, their project, their Live Lab project, is made because the underlying WebRTC systems that formed the basis of Google Hangouts back in the day, I think they were open source, so they were made generally available. So there's tools and stuff that you can sort of stick together with various bits of code. But sometimes it's like, what is the extra thing you need to do to make that work? And is it worth that thing? And does it actually work in the end? So again, it's down to testing and figuring things out. And theatre world doesn't normally have a huge amount of kind of time to develop those sort of things. It barely has enough time to make a show.
So Richard Stegman, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, asks, what about more immersive platforms?
You can answer that, Asta.
Well, I'm not sure if I know exactly what Richard means by this. I'll keep an eye on the chat window to see if he responds to that. I think for me, I tend to think of immersion less in terms of platforms and more in terms of whether I am feeling transported into an experience or not. But I'm imagining that Richard might be referring more to VR, AR type platforms, like visually immersive other worlds. Have you dabbled in those at all so far?
Only to the extent of a real dabbling. I'm very interested in kind of AR stuff, because that kind of is like a sort of in your own head version of the kind of projected worlds that we've already worked with. Perhaps Adam has something to say. Throw in the baton.
Oh wow, gosh, I've caught it. Now I was just thinking about arriving in a small town in Germany and suddenly seeing a whole lot of people all together and all looking at their phones, and I've kind of talked to someone what was going on. This was a kind of Pokemon Go collection. Do you know what I mean? But everybody brought together to share some extraordinary experience, which was both about kind of digital presence, but also about physical presence being expressed in a different way. And there was something kind of really rather beautiful of this kind of collection of really extraordinarily different people, both from one another, you know, in kind of age, ethnicities or whatever, but kind of all in little groups, kind of both looking at their phone and being aware of the physicality of the people around them. And I thought, you know, there is something really interesting about kind of the ways that people are brought together by things that they kind of glimpse or aware of digitally. But sometimes I always think it's a bit like, you know, how in the days when there was still football, I could get kind of incredibly excited about this kind of digital thing that I couldn't really sense, or how dramatic it was to be on the tube and not have the signal, and therefore not know the score for the net for 20 minutes or something. So there's a very strange relationship between when we commit to believing in a story, its absence can be even more powerful than its presence in a strange way.
I feel like that is a really nice, weighty statement to finish on.
Oh dear. Anyway, no, Jason needs to say the last, has to say.
No, I'm good.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Jason. Thank you, Adam and Aneta, for joining in the conversation. Jura and Olivia as well for supporting us behind the scenes today with the streaming, and for all of you guys who joined us online. Thank you so much for your questions and your feedback. A recording of this talk will be uploaded to YouTube and be available via this page, as indeed will the future talks. And any materials and links that Jason might share to do with this video will appear in that video description. So please, again, like and follow this channel to stay tuned for the next events. The next one in this series is on the 25th of June. And will be with Christian Shiren of Be Another Lab. So that talk is entitled Entanglement, Embodiment, Agency and Narrative Practice, and asks how centering embodiment can enable innovative practices within the gaps between disciplinary and discursive boundaries. Be Another Lab, briefly, is an interdisciplinary transnational group dedicated to understanding, communicating and expanding subjective experiences as a means to facilitate action across identity fault lines. Since 2012, this group has used techniques derived from virtual reality, cognitive science, and performance in developing innovative applications within art, scientific research, social projects, healthcare, and education. And Christian's practice has expanded these methods to include emergent critical practices within AI, future studies, and community resilience. Yeah, Christian will share a bit about how Be Another Lab have sought to harness the effective affordances of immersive technology in addressing challenges in context as varied as the Rio de Janeiro favelas and the World Economic Forum in Davos. So thanks so much for joining us today. And if you do feel like it, please do continue the conversation over on Twitter at storyfutures.com, or at StoryFutures rather, and sign up to our mailing list at storyfutures.com. Otherwise, I hope to see you again in the future for the next talks. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Asta. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Adam. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.